Their marriage didn't begin with love. It began with a deal. There was no candlelit proposal, no love letters, no stolen glances across a crowded room. Only contracts, conditions, and silence. Isabella Reid knew exactly what she was doing when she signed her name beside Julian Blackwood's on the marriage certificate. She wasn't naive. She wasn't hopeful. She was a scientist, a grown woman, and the daughter of a neurologist whose independent research center was weeks away from collapse. Julian, on the other hand, saw marriage as duty. After the death of his youngest sister, who was once expected to carry on the Blackwood name, Julian became the only one. The pressure to produce an heir, to carry forward the legacy of a family older than the city itself, weighed on him like iron. He needed a wife who understood that love was not a requirement in this arrangement. That's why two strangers sat across from each other at a dinner arranged by lawyers. Not for conversation, but for negotiation. No one asked, "Do you love me?" No one said, "What do you dream of?" Only statements like, "My family expects a child within a year. My research lab needs guaranteed funding. Discretion is non-negotiable. I don't need affection, just cooperation." 3 months later, they stood at the altar of a centuries-old cathedral. No one cried. No one kissed like lovers. It felt less like a wedding and more like a merger between two empires. Then came the wedding night. Julian didn't offer a goodnight kiss. He didn't even sit beside her. He looked her in the eyes and said with surgical precision, "Within 1 year you will give me a child, if not, I will leave." No anger, no softness, just a cold reminder of the contract they'd both agreed to. Isabella didn't cry. She nodded once, then turned away, leaving behind a husband she had never truly known. Their marriage did not begin with a love story. It began with a deadline. 6 months after the wedding, the Blackwood estate in Kensington remained as still as if no vows had ever been spoken there. Every morning, Isabella woke at 5 a.m., brewed her coffee, recorded her data, and quietly descended into the basement where she had turned an old storage room into a private research lab. She never entered Julian's wing, and he never stepped into hers. There were no fights, no tenderness, just clipped, emotionless exchanges like administrative memos between two CEOs. "I'll be away this weekend. Do you need the driver?" "No, I'll walk." "All right." Julian Blackwood was the epitome of English aristocracy, polished, composed, and as distant as a marble statue in a museum. He appeared at dinner, ate quietly, then vanished. Sometimes Isabella felt less like a wife and more like a carefully placed object, polished, present, and politely kept out of reach. What troubled her most wasn't the coldness. It was the brief, flickering moments when he looked at her, not with cruelty, but with something unspoken, almost vulnerable, before retreating again behind his perfect mask. One winter evening, snow blanketed the city. Isabella returned late, arms full of research folders. She didn't expect Julian to be standing on the porch, no coat, no tie, just a white shirt and a glass of whiskey in hand. "Late," he said, not accusing, not even curious. She paused, nodded, said nothing. He glanced at the folders. "Still working on brain trauma cases?" She nodded again. He gave a small, genuine smile, free of sarcasm. "I think I'm living with one that no one's managed to heal." She didn't respond, but that night, for the first time, Isabella lingered in the sitting room. They said little, just sat together, watching frost gather on the window pane, and for a fleeting second, he didn't feel so far away. A week later, she collapsed in her lab. Julian was the one who found her. He carried her, his first physical touch since the wedding night. She woke in the bedroom, saw him sitting beside her, worry etched into his face. "You haven't eaten in 2 days," he said softly, not scolding, just remorseful. She tried to sit up. "I forgot." "Don't forget yourself for your work," he murmured. "I didn't pay for you to die in this house." The words were clumsy, maybe careless, but they caught something in her throat. She turned away, silent. And for the first time, he didn't walk away either. From that day on, breakfast trays began to appear outside her door. Tiny notes attached. Don't skip meals. No signature, no explanation. They still lived like parallel universes. But something had shifted. Something barely visible, like the first snow resting gently on the windowsill. Not enough to melt, but enough to know that winter had come. And spring might, just might, follow. It was a mid-January night, and the wind from the Thames cut through London like glass. The sky was pitch black, no moon, no stars. In the dim kitchen, Isabella was warming up a bowl of soup she'd made the night before, a small comfort in her solitary routine. Then came footsteps, rushed, erratic, unlike anything she'd heard in this house before. A glass shattered. A loud thud followed. She bolted out of the kitchen, heart pounding. Julian lay collapsed in the upstairs hallway, face flushed, eyes wide, lips swelling, and arms twitching violently. She didn't think. She ran to him, checked his pulse, faint, his breath gasping. Anaphylactic shock. "Julian!" she shouted, rolling him onto his side to clear his airway. Her mind shifted into medical mode. She raced to her room, grabbed the emergency kit she always kept from her hospital days, a personal epinephrine injector. No time for panic, no space for fear. She injected the medication, monitored his heart rate, kept talking to him, anything to keep him conscious. Minutes passed, his breathing slowed, his skin paled, but he lived. Julian woke to a dim room and a pounding head. His throat burned. Isabella sat beside him, hair tousled, face damp with sweat. "You," he rasped, "you saved me." She didn't meet his gaze. "You had a severe nut allergy. Who eats cake without checking the ingredients?" He gave a hoarse laugh. "I forgot. I don't remember the last time I cared about myself." For the first time in months under the same roof, they looked at each other as people, not roles, not obligations. "Have you always had this allergy?" she asked. "Yes, since I was a child. But after my sister died, I stopped eating the things she loved. The cake tonight, it was from our new housekeeper. She didn't know." "Your sister?" Isabella asked gently. "Amelia?" he whispered. "She fell down the stairs when she was 12. Severe brain trauma. Died 3 weeks later. After that, my mother fell into depression. My father buried himself in the firm. And I became the only heir. I had to be strong, perfect. No room for weakness. No room for breaking." Isabella's hands clenched unconsciously. "I studied brain trauma because of a boy I couldn't save when I was 19. A cycling accident. He died. I felt I wasn't good enough. So I started, and I never stopped." Julian looked at her, his gaze softening. "So we're both living to fix something we couldn't save." That night, there were no kisses, no embraces. But the invisible wall between them seemed to thin, worn down by the very wounds they never meant to share. 2 weeks later, Julian invited her to dinner for the first time since their wedding. It was a simple meal. Soft pasta, red wine, and candlelight. Isabella wore a modest dress, no makeup. But her eyes no longer held wariness. "Thank you for that night," he said quietly. "I'm just glad you're alive," she replied. "Not just for saving me, but for not walking away." There was silence. Then Julian asked, hesitant, "If you could go back, would you sign the contract again?" Isabella stared at him for a long moment. "If I had known that beneath all that coldness was a heart still hurting, maybe I would have signed, but I'd negotiate better terms." Julian chuckled. "What, breakfast in bed every morning?" She tilted her head, half teasing. "Or at the very least, an honest gaze." They laughed, a small sound, but the first laughter to echo through that too-quiet house. That laugh had been small, frail like morning mist, but it left something behind in Isabella, warmth and fear, because she knew that once the heart begins to feel, the mind will be tested. A few days after that dinner, Isabella stood in the bathroom, a pregnancy test in hand. She was nearly 3 weeks late, but had been in denial. Exhaustion, stress, sleepless nights, there were many explanations. But deep down, she already knew. And when the 2 pink lines appeared, she just stood still. No joy, no panic. Pregnant, not with 1, but with 2 lives. At her 8-week scan, the doctor confirmed it's twins. 2 tiny heartbeats echoed from the screen, and for the first time in a long while, Isabella cried in a clinic room. Not from fear, but from awe. She stepped out, holding the scan in her hands, sat in the car and placed a hand over her belly. Her thoughts swirled. She saw Julian's face, his softened gaze over dinner, the first true smile after months of coldness. And then, like a thunderclap, 1 year to give me a child, or I'll walk away. The ultimatum returned, louder, clearer than ever. Isabella tightened her grip on the folder. She couldn't tell him. Not now. She began to pull away. No more shared dinners, no more morning notes on breakfast trays. She blamed work, her health, stayed silent through it all. Julian noticed, but he didn't push, didn't question. He simply watched. One night, while searching for an old medical text in the estate's library, Isabella found a locked drawer in Julian's office. Curiosity stirred. She found the key on his desk and opened it. Inside were legal documents, correspondences, and a thick file stamped with her father's name, Dr. Richard Reid. Her hands trembled as she opened it. She had no idea that 17 years ago, her father, once a leading figure in neuroresearch, had been sued by Blackwood and Sons for unethical human testing in pediatric brain trauma. Julian had been 16. The lead plaintiff, his father, Harold Blackwood. The case had ruined her father's career. Funding pulled, reputation shattered. Isabella had believed it was poor financial decisions, bad luck. She never knew it had been a strike delivered by the very family she now belonged to. She placed the file down. Her eyes were dry. She wasn't chosen by accident. Not for love, not even for her work, but as restitution or control. Their marriage was never an accident. That night, Isabella vomited in her bathroom, not from morning sickness, but from disgust. She looked into the mirror and saw a stranger, empty eyes, pressed lips, hands over her stomach as if to shield her unborn children from the lies of the world outside. Julian knocked just then. "Isabella, are you all right?" She wiped her face, opened the door. "I'm tired. I'd like to rest." He hesitated, about to speak, but stepped back. "I won't disturb you." She closed the door, and for the first time since their wedding, she cried. Alone. Not because she was broken, but because she had started to love and realized that love had grown from the roots of a long-buried betrayal. Love had sprouted from the cracks of old wounds, but when its roots took hold in lies, Isabella knew what she carried could no longer survive in silence. The day Isabella decided to leave, London wore a light rain. Not heavy, just enough to coat the windows with quiet drops, the same way she had existed in this house for nearly a year, silently, without a trace. She packed without a word. Not much, just a few clothes, 1 folder of medical files, and 2 copies of the twins' ultrasound. She left 1 copy on her vanity, beneath a slim envelope, written in neat, steady handwriting. "You wanted heirs. I've given you 2. The contract is fulfilled. I will raise them with love, not legacy. Isabella?" There were no more tears. She had cried all she needed that night in the bathroom when she realized that every tenderness Julian had shown was the surface of a deeper iceberg named obligation. Yes, he had changed. Yes, she had felt moments of honesty. His gaze, the hand he didn't retract, the unsigned notes. But it had all begun in captivity, and she wanted her children born outside its walls. With quiet help from her longtime friend Louise, an obstetrician, Isabella left the Blackwood estate at 5 a.m. the next morning. No driver, no farewell. She fled to Cornwall, to the southwest coast where her father used to take them on holiday summers. There, she rented a small cottage by the sea and began working at a local health clinic under a different name. She didn't want protection. She didn't want headlines. She just didn't want to be found. 9 months passed like ocean winds. Isabella gave birth to 2 healthy boys, Leo and Elias, both with storm gray eyes like their father. When the nurse placed them on her chest, she cried. Not from pain, but from knowing she had just stepped into a new world with 2 hearts that fully belonged to her. Julian discovered she was gone that same afternoon. He found the letter and the ultrasound. No one told him where she had gone. No one dared. For the first time, Julian withdrew from the board, disappeared from the financial world, and shut down every media inquiry. He didn't cry, but Isabella's room was left untouched, and the hand-carved crib he had commissioned still sat by the window, silent and empty. A week later, Julian visited his father. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. "You destroyed a good man's life. I married to repair the damage, and I made a worse one. I won't repeat that mistake." Then he walked out. In the quiet Cornwall cottage, Isabella woke every morning at 4:30 a.m., feeding, changing, soothing 2 tiny boys who were growing stronger by the day. Every wobbly step, every coo, every sleepy smile was a balm to her heart. She didn't look back. But sometimes, as the sun dipped over the sea, she wondered, if Julian had been honest from the beginning, would things have been different? There was no answer, but she had made a choice. She hadn't left for revenge. She had left to protect the purest part of the love that once tried to bloom. Isabella didn't leave to disappear. She left to preserve what little light remained in their love. And Julian, left behind, was now face to face with a kind of emptiness no legacy could fill. The room Isabella once slept in remained untouched, blankets neatly folded, a few medical books stacked on the desk, and a chipped porcelain mug on the bedside table, the only sign that someone once brought warmth to this cold estate. Julian sat there most nights, no lights, no whiskey, just silence. He used to think he knew himself, strong, composed, immune to sentiment. But that same control had cost him everything. A woman he hadn't yet loved enough, and 2 children he had never seen. The mansion was too big now, too still. He ignored every call from the firm, declined meetings. Blackwood & Sons still ran, but its CEO vanished from headlines, galas, and family gatherings. Instead, Julian spent his time revisiting Isabella's research proposals. He reread them, highlighted notes, and reached out to the NGOs she had once mentioned, names he'd brushed off, now his only focus. Eventually, he launched a foundation, the Amelia and Leo Fund, named after his sister and the child he never got to hold. Its mission: fund neurological rehab programs in underserved areas, with one standing rule: women-led research teams would be prioritized. 1 year passed. Julian never hired investigators, never forced information from anyone. He believed that if Isabella wanted him to know, she would send a sign. If she didn't, then her silence was the message. Then one day, during a board review of the Foundation's rural outreach programs, a report flashed on screen: Child Brain Recovery Initiative, Cornwall Branch. Filed by Dr. Isabel R., no last name. Julian's heart stilled. He didn't act immediately. He noted the location, then drove to Cornwall himself. No guards, no announcement. At a small playground near a rural clinic, he stood at a distance and watched. 2 little boys played on the swings. One fell, the other rushed over, helped him up, and smiled. They had light brown hair and soft, storm gray eyes. Eyes that once looked back at him through a mirror. Julian didn't approach, didn't call out. He just stood there, one man carrying 1,000 unspoken words, none of which he had the right to speak. Then he turned away. That evening, Julian sent an email, not to Isabella, but to the planning committee of an international medical ethics conference. Topic: Science, Love, and the Cost of Arranged Marriages. When Silence Becomes the Price. Speaker nomination, Dr. Isabella Reid. He waited. Not sure if she'd see it, not sure if she'd come. But deep down, he knew. This wasn't a plea or a trap. It was the first time, and maybe the last, he could invite her to a space where nothing needed to be fixed, defended, or explained. Just heard. Not as CEO Julian Blackwood, but as a man who had once failed, and who now chose to make amends, not with power, but with silence, patience, and respect. At the Royal Institute of Medicine in London, the April sky had just cleared. The air was damp, but the light was gentle. Isabella stepped onto the stage, hair pinned back, a crisp white suit, and a mic at her ear. No heavy makeup, no spotlight. Just the quiet presence of a woman who had walked through fire and survived. She didn't know if Julian would be there, but as the lights dimmed and the audience filled in, she spotted him in the very back row, gray shirt, composed face, and an expression no longer proud, but honest. Her heart skipped. The moderator announced, Dr. Isabella Reid, community neurologist, keynote speaker for today's session, Invisible Trauma in Loveless Marriages. There are wounds no MRI can detect, wounds that alter lives. No one tells us that a love never spoken can harm the brain. No one teaches us that silence prolonged enough can turn a strong woman into a shadow of herself. I lived in a house large enough for 3 generations, but every footstep echoed like it was made in a tomb. People called me lucky, wealth, a powerful husband, a contract with clear terms, but I was not loved. I was conditional. The auditorium fell silent. Isabella paused, then continued, soft voice, sharp truth. The only reason I'm alive to speak today is because I chose to leave, not out of hatred, but to survive. I chose life for myself and for 2 children who deserve to grow without the burden of silence or legacy. I don't ask for agreement, I only ask to be heard. And if just one person in this room learns to listen before judging, then today was not wasted. She bowed her head. Scattered claps. Then more. Then a surge of applause. As Isabella stepped down, the host began to close the session, until Julian stood up quietly from the last row. He didn't wait for invitation. He walked to the stage. Murmurs filled the room. Some recognized him, some didn't. Isabella stood frozen. The moderator blinked. I'm sorry, sir, Julian spoke gently. I'm not here to hijack. I'm here to say something I should have said long ago, and now is the only time I can. He stood at the mic. No papers, no assistants, no practiced speech, just a man who had lost everything. A little over a year ago, I asked a woman to marry me without love. I gave her terms. I set boundaries. I called it safety. I thought I was protecting myself, but I was killing the humanity in someone else. He paused. I turned a wife into a condition, a woman into a contract, a home into a boardroom. He looked at Isabella, not begging, not pleading, just facing her. She didn't leave to punish me. She left because she was the only one brave enough to live honestly. I had power, I had wealth, but she had courage, and I didn't, at least not then. The audience held their breath. I'm not here to fix anything. I'm not here to beg. I'm here to say I was wrong. And if one day I am worthy to be a father, not just biologically, but truly, then I'll be there. Waiting. He stepped away, bowed, walked off stage. No one clapped. No one stopped him. Only silence remained. But it was no longer dead silence. It was the silence of truth finally spoken. Isabella stood still, clutching her bag strap, because the man who walked off that stage was no longer the man she married. But maybe, just maybe, he was the man she should have loved all along. Julian stepped off that stage with nothing left to hide, while Isabella remained rooted, tired of holding everything in. In that single moment, amid hundreds of eyes, there were only two hearts, one unarmored, one unlocking. 3 days after the conference, Isabella returned to Cornwall. Everything was the same: the little seaside cottage, her son's laughter echoing in the yard, and the tea kettle whistling each morning like life reminding her, it goes on. But something inside her had shifted, not because Julian apologized, but because, for the first time, he didn't ask to return. He only asked to be heard. And that made her think of him. That night, as Elias battled a mild fever from teething, Isabella sat by his crib, cool cloth in hand, eyes drifting to the moonlit ocean outside. And in that moonlight, she remembered Julian's eyes on stage, raw, unguarded. Part of her was still afraid, still cautious, but the woman who had once seen kindness behind his cold exterior couldn't pretend she hadn't seen it now. The next morning, she wrote a short letter, no explanations, just one line. If you truly want to meet them, not to demand, but to be present, come to the South Shore Cliffs at 5 p.m. this Sunday. She asked a friend to hand-deliver it to the Blackwood Foundation office. She didn't know if he'd still be there, but if his change was real, he would come. Sunday afternoon. The sky was soft gray, the sea still. Wind whispered, but didn't chill. Isabella stood at the cliffs, hands in coat pockets, eyes fixed on the horizon. The boys were home. She didn't know which version of Julian might show up, the father, the man, or another retreat. Then, down the muddy path, a lone figure appeared. Heavy coat, muddy boots, no guards, no car. Julian, he stopped a few feet away, waiting. She looked at him. You came. He nodded. I didn't want to miss the first chance I might finally get right. Silence stretched. Not heavy, but necessary, like space left between two breaths. Isabella spoke first. They don't need a legacy. They need presence, not from a successful man, but a father who can sit on the floor and build blocks with them. Julian's voice was steady. I don't know how to be a father, but I want to learn. If you'll let me. She nodded slowly, no smile, but her eyes softened. They're home. If you'd like, you can start with bedtime stories. For the first time in nearly 2 years, Julian smiled. Not his public smile, a real one, quiet and warm. I do a very convincing bunny voice. She chuckled, soft, unexpected, not enough to erase the hurt, but like a cracked window in winter, enough to let the light in. That evening, Julian sat cross-legged on the floor, Leo on one side, Elias on the other, both watching the strange man curiously. He fumbled through a picture book, made a silly bunny voice, and both boys burst into laughter. From the doorway, Isabella leaned against the frame, clutching a throw pillow, watching silently. She knew life wouldn't restart from zero, but forgiveness didn't require forgetting. Forgiveness, sometimes, was just saying yes to letting someone walk with you again. And that night, when Julian whispered goodnight, his real voice, no performance, she knew. Forgiveness had begun.